Right, so tonight we're going to have a look at, we're going to be using some drips. Definitely it's going to be like a sort of drip race between two colourways. And what I want to do is we're going to get some drips travelling from down in one direction, dry off the paper, and then flip our papers round and get a second sort of row of drips so that we're going to get some merging, hopefully. I might keep the paper wet, and just because what I'm hoping is we're going to use I want you to pick two colours to work with, or kind of two colour groups. I'm going to go for a kind of blue and then a sort of pinky red. I'm hoping that when they hit in the middle, we're going to get a sort of purple appearing, sort of like a sort of combination of the two sort of coming together. So I'm going to start by painting some water in the centre of my paper. So and then we're going to get drips going down, hopefully, so they start off in a dry zone and then hit this kind of oasis in the middle of the paper, and we get a change round. I'm going to be using some inks as well as watercolour paint. If you've never used drawing inks before, I always say to people, do go and get some and give them a go, because they are fantastically versatile. They work very much like watercolour paints, but they're obviously they come liquid, and they have a greater level of vibrancy, which I think is really appealing. So I'm just painting a sort of wet area of sort of in the middle, and then I'm going to get either start mixing up some watercolour paints, or get some, if you have got inks and you're using those, then you can use those, but you want to then mix up some fairly liquid paint. I'm going to do some watercolour to start with, and then we'll move in. I'll sneak in some inks when no one's looking. So I'm just mixing up, because I want to get paint that's wet enough that's going to start running from the top, and it's going to got enough sort of oomph to get to the central wet section. So I'm starting off with a blue, and I want to get some water. Oh, give my camera, I need to tilt my camera because there we go. There's a tiny bit of blue paint lurking up there, but I want to get a nice lot mixed up and plenty of water, and then I'm going to keep on adding some paint into that and a bit of water into it, and eventually that little tiny reluctant shy little blue moment at the top is going to start spreading down the page. There we go. And see, as it hits that water zone, you get that lovely feathering out effect across into that sort of wet area. So that's what we're sort of trying to get happening to begin with, is pumping sort of water into that sort of top edge. So I'm building a margin where my brush is just slightly overlapping the masking tape at the top of my page, and you can start mixing different blues in, sort of layering blue on top of blue, and then, or whatever colour you're going for. You might want to, do contrasting colour, completely opposite colours, or you might want to go for two that are perhaps more sympathetic, or just see what we get. And if I'm trying to get those, there's a lovely drip on this. So look how it's like gorgeous. Look the way it's hit that. It's just hit that bottom of where I've painted water and created that square line. How exciting! There we go. That's going to come down there. And if you can't get your paint to drip or dribble, if you kind of like get some paint on the surface and then almost sort of like put your brush on and kind of pulse it with water, and that starts to pump water into that paint drop, and then eventually it can't hold anymore. It can't sort of keep contain any more water, and it has to go somewhere. And with luck, it will sort of go down down your page. So I'm going to put another. So I'm just going to add it. See, this one's being reluctant. It doesn't want to go. Come on, I'm going to just keep adding some water, and you're going to go. It's sort of like it's diverting down the sides. I'm going to get it. But we want to try and get this sort of, there we go, that's gotcha. This sort of like pathways through. And then once you've got some pathways of happening, you can come back and add some more paint in over the top. And again, just sort of pressing the brush, dabbing it onto the picture. So it's starting to sort of get more pigment in channels coming down. I want to keep moving across, eventually to come across the whole top of the page. I'm going to add a little bit of, so I've got some purple, some purpley blue and some blue. And you'll find that if you've got one to drop down, you can then kind of come back and you can put a second colour into that one as well and kind of get it to increase. So I'm going to coming across, I want to try and get, ideally I want to get a whole of this middle section sort of worked on, so that there's a sort of area of colour or wetness in the middle. There we go, with all these sort of areas. And as it's coming down, you've got a different effect each time, because as you've just done a patch of water in the middle, you're going to get a drier area towards the edge, so we get a slightly different feel. And you can see already these ones are starting to spread, and we're getting this lovely, this sort of colour effect where the colour is spreading out and sort of almost separating. Is because I started with a purpley blue, and then I put a bluer blue on top and sent it down the same pathway. So if I do that again on this side, so you can see the effect. So if I can get a purpley one to start off from here, see that sort of more purpley paint, and that's right, that's come down. And then if I'm going to come back onto that and then go for a bluer tone, and I'm going to sort of put that on top of where I had the purple, and then sort of send that down afterwards. And then so you're sort of layering the colours one on top of the other, and then as this one spreads out, hopefully you should see that you get like this blue purple haze. I think that's a song. And then it's got sort of blue core and this sort of like purple spreading haze kind of coming through. So I'm going to keep on working. And it's a lovely technique, actually, if you want to paint sort of some semi-realistic tree shapes. This is a really nice way of creating sort of a bank of trees with tall, elongated sort of trunks. That's the word, isn't it? Trunk, obviously. Because you can kind of get this effect. You can imagine doing this in lots of greens and then getting these sort of like spindly trunks to fall down. And that, although it's quite sort of abstract, and so you can sort of then build that into a kind of strange semi-real landscape, which is quite good fun. It's very good for doing any kind of botanical kind of things that have a stem or a trunk. They'll get a bit more. And so when we hit this side, we're getting a much thinner, because we're coming down over dry paper here, so we're getting a much thinner, more controlled line. So it's, again, it's a different kind of feel. And I'm just keeping on pushing some water down through that, and hopefully that's going to get some more of these stripes, drip trails, whatever you want to think of them as. So that one's sneaking along and going sideways and adding more into this one, but I still quite like the way you get these. And as you can see where you've got the edge of the square brush here, it's giving you that straight edge in the water, and it creates a sort of a straight margin that the paint likes to follow. But I'm just going to bring that lower so I can get a bit more. I want to get a third thin one coming down on this side. That's it, like that. So just sort of get that in. And what's quite nice as well is as this paper is wetter, it's sort of slightly bulging, so it's slightly pushing the other side. So as stuff comes down, it will slightly change how that, it doesn't look as straight. It's sort of like, because the paper it's going over is slightly cockled, it kind of has quite an interesting wobbly effect. It's all about being interesting and wobbly. That's the thing to aim for. So let's bring some more in on this side, and again it's sort of going, when it goes over the dry paint, it's the paper, it becomes much thinner and sort of perhaps a bit darker. There's ever such a lot of paint collecting on my table down below, but I should really have put some kitchen paper down first, but you know, I don't suppose Van Gogh worried about putting kitchen paper down, did he? Or Jackson Pollock, I bet he made a right mess. Right, so let's just get these all tipping down, and then once we've got this sort of going all the way across, we can come back to some of the first ones which will have dried and become a lot paler, and we can add a second kind of go of paint coming across here, and that just helps to, you know, you're getting more layering, then you're getting stranger, you're getting a sort of a next layer of patterns kind of coming over there, and adding a bit of extra, and it's sort of, again, it's increasing that colour, making it stronger. I'm going to have a go at adding some ink into that just to see if there's a different effect. Sometimes it has quite a nice effect on the watercolours and changes it around. But I've just got my blue ink here. So here it is. I use lots of different kind of inks. Liquitex is one of my favourites. Alas, I'm not sponsored by them, so feel free to get some, but I won't get any you know, kickbacks, I promise. But you can see how it's a much more powerful colour, and it just adds that extra oomph. Even just plain fountain pen ink will do something like this as well. You know, it'll give you an extra depth of colour, an extra dimension to add in. You can even try things like really watered down acrylic paints. You can mix the two together, and it just gives you a different sort of surface. But I love that when it sort of comes into that wet section there, it's got this beautiful sort of bloom of ink. And if you imagine if you're then going to work on top of that in white inks, that would be really exciting. So that's some Prussian blue coming in there, really lovely and dark. And then I've got some I want to find some other blue. And that's raw umber. That's no good. That's not a blue. I've got some purple here, so I'm going to add some purple drops. Just in the same sort of vein, really. So I've got that slightly different colour in. Here we go. This is a different kind of ink. It's Sennelier, which means nothing to me, but it's a different kind of ink. It's wet. It's a purple colour, and I'm going to add where I've got that dropped in there. I'm going to come back now and add some water onto that, and that's going to increase that flow down and make it spread a bit more into those trails. That's it. That's gives them some, and we're starting to get some nice bloom effects at the very top there. It's quite, oh look, that one suddenly decided to go sideways. Look, isn't that clever? It leapt sideways, defied gravity. So I can bring some of those into here. Just again, just pushing some water down through those trails that I've put in and see what it does to them and where they go. Right, so I was in two minds whether to dry in between or not. So I think it'd be quite nice to dry this off because I've got some really nice shapes that I kind of want to keep going. And then we're going to come back and use a slightly different colour range. We're going to flip our canvases round and do the same sort of effect on this side and see what happens there. If we don't get anything very exciting happening, we can add some more water back into this sort of central zone. But I'm going to mute for a second and grab my hairdryer, and I'm just going to, I'm trying to put a little bit of water into there as well, just to sort of like increase some movement there. There we go, lovely. Right, I'm going to grab my hairdryer, dry all this bit off. It's going to take a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back, flip the canvas round, and we'll try a slightly different colour group moving across. We'll flip our canvas and try colours coming across, which will be coming across that way. So I'm just going to go mute and get my hairdryer. Right, I'm teaching a class, honey, so you may have to wait occasionally to get whatever app it is.
Sorry.
You can't come in here and distract me, please.
Thank you. That's all I needed.
I know, but... Bye. Okay, so that's nice and dry now, certainly dry enough for this. So I'm going to swap. I quite like it when you start with the hairdryer and it's still wet and you kind of like, you get some strange spurs kind of rushing off sideways. You get some real gravity defying moments like that. And I just love turning them around because you sort of get a completely different vista as to how it looks, you know, because now all these lines are doing something sort of very different. So we're going to start, I'm going to put a little wet brush, or just a border of water up here, and then we'll try adding some, I'm going to go for like a sort of pinkier, warmer colour range. They're still on the blue scale ideally, but sort of pinky ones. But again, you can choose a different colour, whatever colour mood you're in. If we don't get anything exciting happening here, and it's all a bit too, becomes too much like a sort of plaid shirt, then we'll add some water. I'm going to spray a bit of water across here to give it a bit more movement. But let's start with, if I might spray water just because my current water's got a bit of blue in it. So I'm just going to, no, I'm going to do along the top, a little area of water across that top area so that we can start bringing our sort of pinker tones into. And there we go. So then we're going to get our paint, and I'm going to go for the reddy kind of more purple. Obviously, I'm hoping that when they hit each other, we're going to get some sort of colour change happening, so that in the area in the middle where they're coming down, we're going to get something. If I'm adding red, I'm hoping for something purplish to appear, or more purplish. If that doesn't happen at all, I said we'll just keep going and see what does happen, you know. So because we've got that border of red, we're getting that sort of build-up of red along one side. And there we go down. The first bit is sort of rushed down. Oh, that's quite nice. I think we'll get some more effects going on with that, but we'll get some. Let's get it started. And obviously, as it comes across the whiter area, I think it's reflecting a little bit of water, so it's probably stronger for me again than it is for you, because at the moment the water is just adding a bit of shine to the surface, which is slightly causing it to white out, but there is more colour going on that I can see. But I'm just going to, again, James up idea, just pumping that colour, like brush across the surface, just adding extra water and getting that to come down. I think we're going to need a little bit of water on that surface to help something a bit more exciting happen, or it's just going to be straight lines. So let's I'm going to, again, a delicate application of a wet brush, just to, let's go in between some of these areas, just to add a bit more, to make that surface a bit more live. And you might decide to choose a different area to add some. I'm going to put some down here just to see what happens. Where I've got a white, but I'm just going to put a stripe of water on that. So let's see how that happens now, what develops now. It's a great thing about these things. You never know exactly what you're going to get, and best laid plans and all that. That's quite cool. Look at the way it kind of defies gravity. It kind of goes sideways. Things I get excited about that, you know, other people may not understand, but it's just very exciting the way it does that, where it's sort of like that little bit of unpredictability. That's better. I've got a nice bloom happening there. That's nice. I'm liking that more now. So I think that was definitely the right move, I think, to add, because look, we're getting sort of like strange directional changes. It's fantastically unpredictable, and that's what we want. We want sort of to be giving ourselves things to explore, things that we aren't predicting, so that we don't have to. It's not about surrendering control to the paint a bit, isn't it? Or it's about sort of letting the paint lead us more than sort of trying to be too defined. Yes, that's kind of lovely coming through there. And I'm going to come back with because we're sort of in this sort of purpley blue. I'm going to come back with some purple on this side as well, so that, because I've got blue and purple, and then I've got red and purple, and that's starting to give us our kind of colour palette for the night. And so I'm going to put a little bit of purple in there as well. I've got some of my purple ink again, so I'm going to try some purple ink. You might want to mix up your secondary colour paint and see what that does. So let's bring some purple in across that edge there. I'm going to have to probably add some water to that to get it to really flow. So let's do that, and then I'm going to add some crimson ink as well. So I'm back with some more red colour. So a nice one's gone across there. Let's get some more water into that. So we're starting to get some good blooms happening, which is what we want. Just to bring that in across there, and again, just getting some more interest hopefully happening. There's a nice blob there that hasn't dropped its. There we go. That's gotcha. It's like a bit like clouds. The way clouds are water droplets building up above our heads, and eventually they become too heavy to hold, and we get rain. And it sort of has that kind of feeling. I'll just bring some of that pink in there, right? And then I want to get some more pink toned pink ink, which, you know, is a very satisfying phrase to say. I want pink ink. What I love about the word pink is that I don't know if you've ever thought about why colours are called what they're called. The word pink didn't exist until about 1600, which is quite fascinating, because you always assume that these sort of things like colour names have been with us forever, but actually there wasn't a word for pink. The first recorded use of pink was in the 1600s as a word written down. And it actually comes from, there's that sort of very, very English country garden flower called a pink. Well, it was the colour pink is named after the flower pink, but it wasn't even the colour of the petals that they were picking up on. If you snap the stalk of a pink flower, it goes pink. And it's that sound that became connected with the colour, and of course pinks do have lovely pink petals. But I just think that's really amazing that actually it's the sound of the flower pink breaking, not the colour, which is one of those things that that's a good fact. So I'm just going to bring some more of these sort of colours in. That debate about whether an orange is called orange because it's orange, or an orange is called the colour orange is called orange because oranges are orange. And no one's quite certain. They believe it's an Arabic word, which was originally spelt with a J or equivalent J sound, and that it wasn't the colour orange was named after the fruit. And again, orange is a colour that comes quite late into human recorded speech, because up until that point they didn't have a word for orange. They had yellowy red rather than orange, which is again quite fascinating. Sorry, I'll stop wittering on about colours, but these things interest me. Right, so we're getting a nice combination of sort of like almost like a grid pattern, but I still think that's a little bit too orderly for me, so I'm going to maybe add some water, perhaps with my spray. Let's see what happens. Oh yes, that's more like it. Again, if you haven't got a spray, flick some water off a clean brush and see what that does in the surface. So that's got a lovely splurge moment there, so I'm just going to slightly sort of get a bit carried away shooting a few bits just to kind of get some colours happening and coming across where the paint's still wet. And then what we're going to do is while we've got that surface quite live, let's turn it round again and see how that starts to affect. We're going to start getting things moving that way. So we could put some more colours in here while we're doing that. Let's do that. What should we do? Am I going to go for pinks? Am I going to go for blues? I think I'm going to keep going on with the pinks, and I'm going to sort of bring the blues round. Or maybe this side I'm going to really concentrate on some purple tones, but just sort of bringing those onto the surface. I don't have to do too many, but I can just get this sort of bank of purple. I'm using purple watercolour here just to kind of bring this round, see again where this takes us. Let's really get this going, keeping the surface quite wet in between turns now, so we're starting to really fill it in. I'm going to take the paint all the way up to the masking tape on the edges, so it's got a definite edge, I think, up here, and then bring them round again. And it should find that as the paint builds up again, ready to drop, it's going to kind of follow in the path of its predecessing paint. So it's going to find a paint trail to kind of come down on again. There we go. So it's sort of like slightly touching on all the places that we've already put paint on. So it kind of like follows. This looks like the craziest tube map ever. Like some incredible pathway through hyperspace, maybe hyperspace tube. I'll have to call this one. And then again, because the surface is still quite wet, so when it hits different surfaces, they're going to change, they're going to move. So yeah, we can keep adding some purple in, and you mix the purple with a bit of blue to get a more imperial kind of purple, a more indigo. Indigo is quite an old colour word that's been around for much longer, funnily enough. Violet, however, that certainly hasn't been around for as long. And a lot of the purple colours that we know, like lilac and so forth, invented by the Victorians when they were able to create procyon dyes for fabric dyes. And because up until that point, the only colours that we had were indigo, which comes from shells, and a bit of woad to create purple, which is why purple was always the colour for royalty, because it was the hardest colour to dye cloth. And then the Victorians came along and invented chemical dyes, and they invented lots of purple, and they invented lots of shades of yellow, which again was quite difficult to do. And yellow and purple was actually a very fashionable colour combination in Victorian clothing. So when you see those black and white illustrations of ladies in those big frocks, imagine they were probably all in vastly clashing shades of lilac and yellow. Must have been quite colourful. Very popular for men's trousers, apparently. A sort of Paddington, not Paddington, who's the other one I'm thinking of? Rupert the Bear, kind of check, but in yellow and purple, was apparently very popular. Right, so again, I've got some purple on that side. And again, I'm going to flip around to the fourth side without drying everything off. So things are going to move again as I turn things round. And I'm going to then aim to get some last bit of paint sort of along here. But pinky, but again, purple maybe, but on the pink kind of spectrum. So more of the kind of warmer shades. So I've got my purple watercolour, and I'm going to add in a little bit of pink pigment, or the sort of dark red pigment. So the purples I'm adding are definitely more on a kind of red spectrum. And I'm just going to build those up in there. And then we will have got our fantastically, the world's most exotic checked kind of plaid, most crazy plaid going out there. Or the most creative Scottish tartan ever made, I think. You know, very, very abstract. I'm just going to bring some of those purple tones. There's some beautiful colours along here, just where I've got this fantastic sort of cloud bank along there, which is very exciting. And here we go, just adding in more purple. And if you don't think it's, again, if something not so exciting is happening or it's got a bit dry, a little squirt of water is going to liven up your surface again and get some real cloudiness to happen. So I'm going to do some purple along here. I need to get some more water running through it. And then I'm going to put another little application of pink. But if I put it on top of my purple, it's going to still be on the bluey, purpley side of the spectrum. So let's just bring purple brushes all the way along here. This is going to be a fantastic one. This is definitely one of those ones that's going to keep you quiet for the rest of the week, because there's going to be so many little areas to work on and kind of play with to such great effect. So let's just bring, I'm just going to get my pink ink again and just put a little bit of ink in the top. And if that doesn't run, then I'm going to be squirting a last bit of water at it to see if I can get some areas of some of the quieter bits to kind of flow and flood as well. So let's add in some ink. There, that's got that one to go and come through, pushing that pink along the top. And then I'm going to I'm just going to get some water on my brush this time and just sort of again pump some more clean water into that top section, so that those droplets that are building up, you can see where they're very dark, that's all sort of like potential paint just waiting to fall. So I'm just going to get some water on my brush now and just push some water down through them, so hopefully we can get some movement. There we go, just sort of pushing by overloading those, getting some more water to come down. Brush on the surface, and there we go, and just down it goes into that. And I might just give it a final squirt just because, and see if that does anything, last sort of moments of madness before we dry it off and have a proper look at what we've got. So let's bring these one here in here. There we go. Let's get those rushing down the surface. And so there's really fat ones there. Come on, come on. Yay, that's gotcha. That's gotcha. Get weirdly excited about these things, but why not? People get excited about kicking a ball around. I can get excited about a drop of water rushing down a paper. Here we go. Right, and I'm just going to do a final squirt with my squirty gun. Again, you might want to just give it a final flick over with some water on with a brush, just to get some. That's just some spreading so that there's not too much white. Lovely. Right, that will do, I think. Right, so now I'm going to mute again. I'm going to dry that off, and then we'll see what we're going to take, where we're going to take this lot now. So let me just mute and get my hairdryer. Okay, so here we have this really some gorgeous colour moments through here where I'm getting all sorts of beautiful blooming kind of spreads of colour. So I think I'm going to zoom in quite close to an area, and we'll make a start on looking into it, because I'm just going to get my camera into a position where it can see a bit better. There we go. So hopefully that's not too out of focus. So I'm just going to have a look at this sort of area in here. The pens I'm going to be using tonight, I want to use colours that are kind of related to the areas that the colours that we've done with our paint. So I've got a selection of reds and pinks, and I've got some blues as well. I think there's something quite nice about using a pen that's very close to the colour of the paint you've got on your surface. So it's sort of, I'm just going to see if I can just bring a bit more light onto things without whiting out. That's not too bad. So I think it's quite nice to do that. So am I going to choose, I think to begin with, I'm going to choose some blue, because I'm going to think about the background colour. But I'm going to start just sort of working around these areas, picking out some of the detail that I've got here. Now, as ever, there's absolutely no right or wrong about this and about what we're trying to do. We're just trying to find some shapes within the surface that we've created and see what they give us. So you can go as mad or as controlled as you want with the patterns, but if you're not sure where to start, because sometimes you've got all this going on and it's quite hectic, just start by maybe choosing a colour and outlining where you see the two colours meet. So I'm just using a blue pen to work my way round and so I'm starting to define that little area for myself there, just sort of seeing the shape that's there. And I don't have any strong plans at the moment. When I plan these, often I have an idea of where I want to start, but I don't sort of think about where I'm going to finish, because that tends to come a lot of the time kind of as I'm going. So at the moment I'm just concentrating on this little area and just picking out the blue where I see it next to the purple. Just because, I've got to start somewhere, so we're going to start here really. And I can come down, I've got some nice sort of areas up here. And you find that as you draw these sort of outlines, you start to define pieces of the work. And it's sort of like putting a frame or drawing your attention round what's here. And you can find interesting shapes and colours and forms inside that, which might give you an idea where you want to start. So I've just sort of defined that sort of area in here. I've got a little bit of blue that's just sort of coming through in here, and just creating that, almost like creating a foreground and a background. And sometimes these really take you into sort of creating landscapes and worlds. You start to see places and shapes depending on the colours that you've used. This one is deliberately sort of fantastical and not really related to anything particular, apart from that I just love these colours in combination. But you can see how if you were to use more, I suppose, colours drawn from the environment, it does always seem to sort of create sort of like forests and coral reefs and things like that, which is always great fun to draw and expand on. And a lot of in my illustration work, if I'm thinking of a particular setting, I might create an almost abstract background for myself first, and then work on top of it and on top of it until it has become a sort of setting for a story page in a picture book or something. Here we go. And I'm just going to continue around the edge here. And then I think what I'm going to do is get a purplish pen, or a sort of pinky purplish pen. And I'm maybe going to work a bit into some of this sort of pinky area. So I'm going to just use, again, simple circles, just clustered together. Circles, is really stretching it. They're more sort of like scales, sort of cobbles, something like that, just to bring some texture into this pinky area. So it's starting to stand out differently against the blue background. So the background is definitely, or the blue in this case, sorry, at the moment is definitely being a kind of background colour. And the sort of orange, the pinky purpley, the pinker colour is becoming a sort of more of an object, more of a structure maybe. So I'm sort of trying to keep smaller circles towards the edge of each shape, and then putting larger circles in the middle. And that's because if you get, where you do anything that's a small shape in pen, you're putting more pen on the paper, and you're going over showing less paper through it, if that makes sense. That's quite a clumsy way of putting it, but the smaller the shape is, the more pen colour you're putting on, and it has the effect almost like a sort of shadowing effect. So you can see where I just put small circles of pen in here, that sort of has a bit like a shadow. And then if you do larger circles or shapes, that leaves more of the paint showing through, so it almost has a kind of creates a highlighting effect. So you might want to, here I'm just going to put some large circles in first, like coming across that sort of surface, and then I'm going to cluster in between the outline that you've drawn and those big circles. I'm going to put lots of tiny little circles, and that sort of has the effect of darkening the sort of spaces around those big circles, and that kind of gets a little bit of maybe 3D quality or sort of texture or shading going on into that sort of surface. So it just sort of starts to give it an interest, and you can expand that, you can make that effect or exaggerate that effect by using some white pens. If I just fill in these bits here, and then if I get my white pen, which we were looking at the other week, and hopefully people have got them now and added them into their sort of their pen repertoire, their pencil case, that's the word I'm thinking of. The pen container, the pencil case, you mean, yes. So let's just get, so we can come back, you know, and then add a little hint of white into those circles that we've drawn, and you can do like little half moons or kind of just dots of colour, and that starts to bring these up, and it starts to give them again a bit more contrast, and that adds like a little highlight into them. I mean, I would probably do like a whole level of circles first and then come back and add highlights, but I just wanted to do that now so you can kind of see the effect and kind of see where we're going, because it starts to give it quite a sort of strange textural feel, like it is sort of like coral or something, or, you know, dragon scales or something. And then I'm going to come in with the, on this area here where it's darker, I'm going to do the circles, but I'm going to use a darker colour, so I'm using some blue. And if you kind of see where you've got very dark paint colours together, you can cluster your small circles on top, and then as you come out into a zone of paler paint, like I've got a little bit here, look, that's just sort of a bit paler, then my circles can get larger, so I can kind of follow the light and shade of the paint pattern. You see, that's just come in like that, and they just become a bit bigger and a bit more space. And then as I come down into this dark areas, I'm going to do them, I'm going to exaggerate that darker ripple by coming down along it like that. So that's sort of getting it. And then I've got this one here, look, with this sort of very dark strand here. So I am going to put some circles on it. I don't know if they'll show up particularly well on your monitor because it's so dark. So imagine I will draw them all in. But as I come down to this bit where we get it sort of going into that lighter zone, I can continue my circles down, and it just continues that dribble and gives it a bit more solidity coming down into that sort of part of it. And your circles don't have to stay within the bounds of your paint if you don't want to. You can start maybe sort of like bringing some of them on the outside as well, just sort of as if they're kind of bulging, adding a sort of texture, just sort of adding on to that, so it's all sort of as if it's sort of growing, you know, in sort of feeling. And then I've got this area down here, so I'm going to bring some blue in around here. Again, the blue is a cooler colour, so it's always going to be more of a kind of recessive colour. It's going to look like a background. And then so for this area where it's a bit lighter, I'm going to continue in my pinker colour because that's sort of more top. And it's got a nice area of quite pale there, so I'm going to put some quite big circles in before coming in with the smaller ones in up to that sort of dark blue. That very dark blue colour I'm not going to do a lot at the moment. I might come back to it. We could come and let's see if we could do with some white on that, couldn't we? Because that's going to give us again a kind of different sort of feel. So let's just see. Although it's a chunkier line, I think we can still just get some circular patterns coming in there. Maybe some sort of dot patterns. Maybe just taking them down into sort of smaller bits coming through, just to sort of change that surface again. We can come back, we can do more work on that. You might be able to use a black on that if you want to get something really dark. I've got a gel pen here. This is, let's see what this one does. It's just quite interesting sometimes to see these sort of different pens. Yeah, this is a gel pen, so it's slightly, it's a slightly sort of fluorescent colour. And we can just add some, again, a sort of slightly more orangey tone. On that very pale bit, that's working quite nicely, just to bring that sort of darker, a sort of more voluptuous kind of colours in. Voluptuous, I mean that to mean brighter, something like that. So I've got all this sort of small circle detail here, which I can bring up, like this sort of one coming down that can have some circles filling in that sort of almost like a sort of just a pipe, doesn't it, kind of coming down there. There's something slightly mechanical about it. That's quite an interesting thought. So let's bring some dark blue into some of here as well. So it does have a kind of, there is something slight, I think it's because we've got these slightly straight lines happening, and amongst all these kind of blooms of colour, there is something almost slightly like some very, very bizarre machine kind of going on, you know, some sort of alien tech. Well, that's just my overactive imagination, but it just has that kind of feel of things sort of leading down, sort of pipes and things moving around. And I think that's what I love about doing. There's so many things I love about doing this, but particularly because as you sort of, you wouldn't have thought to yourself, well, I'm going to develop a drawing that looks like some sort of strange alien equipment. And it's just kind of happened around us. Well, it happened on mine anyway. Yours might look like something completely different, but I think that's what you want to do, is kind of let your imagination run riot with what you've got here, because there's so much, you know, it's got so much potential, and to sort of play with things. So again, I'm going to add some highlights onto some of these shapes through here, so they're starting to become starting to work out against the background. You're getting that nice sort of bold highlight colour, and it makes them look, I mean, it could be sort of like berries, couldn't it? They're quite juicy, berry-like colours. I'm really enjoying these highlights on here, so I'm going to put some more in. And these pens, I think, work really well when you're just doing like a dot of white into the surface. It really helps. They're not as accurate in drawing. They're not as delicate as the fine line pens, but I think just using them to sort of dot in highlight, that this really starts to bring this surface to life and give it a load of character. So it's sort of like quite a nice sort of shiny bubble feel happening. This definitely sort of bubble factory. I quite like to do something with the blue now. I'm wondering if we need to get a contrasting line in, sort of, and I'm seeing quite a sort of nice, we've got that nice sort of horizontal kind of coming through here. So I think I'm just going to come through and maybe pick out that slightly darker section of blue, so I've got that stripe defined. And then I'm going to take some wavy lines, just sort of following that outline, but each time I draw it across, I can get a slightly different sweep just by following on. So I'm starting to create the ripples, and the ripples are kind of echoing through this line. And so as each line is copying the one that went before it, it just adds that sort of wave feel, and you get that sort of shape translating through, and it sort of gives an interesting kind of surface, and it looks a bit like it could be sound waves. You can continue them on kind of all through into this sort of dark area, and you can kind of get a pattern almost like the ripples on a pond. If you sort of put a ripple in like on one line, and then the next one you can then sort of mimic that ripple again, so that shape starts to move in another direction. So it's got a nice sort of like waving form, and because it's travelling, keep it sort of travelling behind and on the background, it helps to sort of push this foreground bubbles kind of forward with adding some interest. There's something different going on happening behind it, and we just keep moving that through, and it's got a nice sort of ripple kind of feel. And then I'm going to come in, I'm going to leave that white at the moment because it's sort of all that paler blue section, because it almost again looks like a highlight. So what we could do is create that again by sort of putting some white lines into it. And I've got a purple area here. I think I'll turn that into waves as well, because I want to bring them through. They kind of like stop them at the cross ones that work, and then continue them underneath. It really has that feeling of, it helps to push the pink bits on on forward and have this as being a sort of background shape or background sense like that. And I'm going to come up, so I can keep moving up here as well. And again, just where you've got the top line, you can just, and you can exaggerate it, but just each time you find the bend, you know, whoosh that bend up a little bit further and sort of change that shape again, and it starts to add that feeling of it echoing and getting larger and moving along like this sort of thing, just sort of like working through it. Oops, not the camera. And then of course you can use white in the same way in this sort of background. Stop wiggling. Sorry, just clunked the camera then. So we can bring a white line through just as a wiggle in the same sort of way, or we can bring, and you can just, if you see where you've got like the bump on the background, you can just again use a little white dash following that curved shape, so that where it's bumping up, that sort of gives it a little high point again, as if it's catching the light. And we can just bring them into that bump on, and if you sort of do the same on each row, it's not colouring in between each one, but you can see how that's sort of given it an extra little dimension of highlight. And then you might sort of like, again, just put a little crease. Imagine that sort of movement, like it's a ripple in the water, and you see that ripple kind of breaking up on the moving surface. So it catches highlights on different moments. Just sort of bring those in all the way through. So that's got some sort of like different sort of surface happening behind there. As I said, you know, I'd probably, if I was doing this just for me and working a project, I'd probably do all the line work first, and then I'd come back with the highlighting pen. But I want you to see kind of where you can take it. So I'm sort of like working each little section and then moving on to the next one. It's just time for my tea slurp. There we go, just a little moment of tea. And so let's have a look at this sort of section here. So I've got some nice shapes. I'm going to get a nice strong pink tone again here. If that's not bright enough, I might go for blue, but I can just follow some of these lines kind of coming down. And the sort of shapes in that. I've got an edge of pink there. I just want to bring that out. A nice round sort of section there, and just working in around that darker colour. This is really becoming a very intricate one, and sometimes some of them start really big and bold, and then they sort of do lend themselves to this very sort of detailed consideration. So this is definitely one that's going to keep you going throughout the week. But I think that's really nice because you've got that, you can think, oh, I can just sit down for half an hour and do a bit more and a bit more, and you know, it's always there waiting for you when you have a quiet moment to yourself, however many quiet moments you are lucky enough to have. So I'm just going to do, so again, some larger circles. And it's just amazing how the act of drawing a circle round an area, you start to see colours and patterns inside that circle that you wouldn't necessarily have seen if it was just left undrawn on. You sort of like draws your eye into having a look at what's on the page. And just really interesting the way that sort of happens and the way that works. So in this large section, I've got another stripe look down this side. So I'm going to come in and do a blue, I think, because I want that's quite a dark stripe. I want to bring this sort of bluer section coming down all the way down along there. That's it. And then same with this one. And just, and I've got this very dark here, haven't I? Sort of, so we're going to have this is definitely in front, it's very dark, I think. So my pinker one's going to come down, and using that blue colour, it's kind of stretching this dark blue paint as if it's slightly becoming part of this section below. It's kind of linking these two areas together with the dark blue, and I think that's quite interesting, isn't it? So let's do that again here, because that's bringing that, connecting those very dark stripes of paint together, sort of like visually linking them. And then in this area, this pink is sort of becoming the background, isn't it? Sort of like being, this dark blue is now becoming sort of quite bold and quite the foreground. So I'm going to put some little circles into that. I've got quite distracted by that, but that's great because I'm sort of just journeying through this shape and coming down and coming along the circles there. And then that's it. This edge is pink, but I'm going to bring the blue down so that I'm continuing this idea of these sort of sections linking down to this sort of blue one here. And I've got some nice bendy shapes here. Look, oh, I'm tempted. Shall I keep them? No, I'm going to bring them into this sort of, I'm going to sort of outline, because I've got this one coming down here now, haven't I? So I want to continue this, because I've got this line here. So I might even come back in and take that blue, so it's becoming, it's this sort of lovely connections. I think that's what's nice about this arrangement, is we're seeing all these little connections that can build up to this sort of overall kind of grid feel. And they've got this nice bendy tube here. So let's put some blue around these big bubbles here, and then they can kind of link in round this sort of area, so they've all kind of worked together. And then I can come and add some of my dark blue bubbles into that shape and connect them down, so they're all kind of working down together. And here on this one, I'm going to come down, and we've got a nice bump like that in your paint. You can push a bubble into it and kind of get that oval shape going. And this is great fun. I'm sorry. Sometimes, I do enjoy all of them, but this one is really appealing to me. I was just thinking you could do something, if you really, I really quite like this sort of feeling of machinery that's happening. You could do a lovely one if you switched your colour palettes to sort of like coppery, bronzy, terracotta kind of colours, and it would really start to look like crazy sort of steam train kind of, especially with this sort of like slightly smoky looking background. That might be quite an interesting one to try in all this mythical time that I have to do, when I would be doing stuff for myself. Add it to my ever-growing list of, one day when I get 5 minutes to myself list, I will do this one as well. But this is why I love doing these classes so much, because it's such a gift, really, to be allowed to spend time doing this. It's lovely to be able to share it with you, but it's lovely for myself to be able to do pieces like this, because it's not, well, I don't have to do what someone else is commissioning me to do, and I just get to play and have this fun. So I should thank you again, really, for coming to my classes, because it's just such fun to do this. So now I've got this nice one down here. There's a nice strong edge there, so let's again increase that strength of that edge and sort of bring that down and along and around, just so. And then I've got another one here, so we're getting loads of sort of, and then we've got to decide, haven't we, are we going to take this further down into this sort of, if I look at mine down here, I've got another sort of pipe, as it were, that's coming, so I quite like that. But if I look down at the bottom now, if I slightly out of focus, I'm afraid, because of the way these cameras are made, I've got a fantastically fiery kind of section down here, almost like sort of a furnace going on, and I've got sort of dribbles going down into that. So I've got to decide how I think what I'm going to do to begin with, at least, is I'm going to take this one down to join into this area here. So let's join that. It's a little bit faint, but I can just about pick out where it was. So let's bring my circles coming in down here and into that dark line, and then I'm going to take, that's quite a nice one, so I'm going to take this one down lower. I'm not sure what this produces, this machine. I'm thinking something like unicorns or pixie dust machine, something like that. And where I've got that point where they're sort of joining down like that, I'm going to add some baubles on this side, some circles, just to enhance that feeling that they're sort of clustering in around there. And if you want to make them darker to blend in, you can, just to sort of add that sort of extra strength and drama. So maybe on these ones, if you want to finish one off, I'm just going to put a couple of clusters so they have a definite kind of end point underneath like that. And again, under here, just sort of put some circles in, just so that you've got a reason for them to kind of stop. And then I want to get I'm going to look at this pink section under here, which has got some fantastic sort of fiery colours going on. So I'm going to pick these out a little bit like the waves that I put in up here. But I'm going to use a pink pen and just follow these incredible little bumps all the way up into sort of different sections, so that I'm sort of getting this slightly, flame-like is sort of quite bizarre because they're pink, aren't they? But, imagining that it's sort of like some magical fire going on here. We've had magical bubble pipes, and now we've got magical fire. And just bring some of these, chasing these lines up through into this sort of section and up around this sort of white area. So we're getting all these sort of wiggles kind of coming up here and just really enhancing some of, or picking out some of the shapes that I'm seeing here. And again, I know that your shape is probably completely different and doing something completely else, but I'm hoping that I'm just giving you ideas for what you might be able to pick out in yours if you've got some of these areas of just these beautiful background colours where they're all mingling together. So that's an area of white there, look, so I'm just going to draw kind of around that and just see how these shapes are building up and the sort of relationships. And it's so strange how what is such an abstract idea, there's nothing, when we started this I didn't say, well, I'm going to do a picture that reminds me of a magical fairy bubble machine with a furnace creating pixie dust, because you probably would all stared blankly at me going, what on earth is she talking about? But this is kind of what we're getting to see here, but I didn't know this is where we were going, and this is why this is sort of so exciting, this kind of discovery that you can do and the playfulness that you have from this sort of thing, where it's not it's just endlessly imaginative and you can explore and find all sorts of things in it without getting all emotional. But yeah, I think it's lovely to do this and see where this takes you. So I've got all those sort of lines coming there, adding a bit of definition again. And again, I can come in with, I'm going to add some white highlights to the darker, these sort of like the pipes, as we seem to be calling them, or I seem to be calling that we've got. So let's get those in, just kind of, again, bring them, because it's connecting them into those sort of areas. So by giving the same sort of treatment for these areas here, you can see that visually it starts linking these bits across, even if, I said, even we don't know what the machine does, we know that it's sort of all connected somehow. And just sort of bring these clustering, just with a little white highlight, it just brings it to life. It's so attractive, but it just gives it that sort of surface, a little dot, that's all you need. And yet it really changes that effect, it changes that and changes its nature and gives it real sort of presence. Just bring those, just one little dot. I think I actually learnt this technique off when I had one of my tattoos done. Bizarre what you learn, isn't it? I have got a piece of a tattoo that looks like a piece of jewellery on my arm, and the lady who did all these like lovely trailing beads like this, and if you've ever had a tattoo, they can be quite painful. And after about 6 hours, she was like, well, we're nearly finished, but now we've got the worst bit. I'm going to put a white highlight in every single bead that I've drawn on your arm. And by the end of it, you're going to love the effect, but you're going to hate me. And I didn't hate her, but I was a moment, right, because your skin's terribly sore. And then she's going to come and do a single, like, buzz of her needle into each little bead. And it's a bit like having 100 bee stings in one afternoon. But it looks fantastic. So it's a really good effect just to put the dot of white. And at least when you're doing a painting, it doesn't hurt anywhere near as much as it does when you're having it done on your arm. So yes, one of those ideas. That was a great one at the time. And it does look great now, so we can forgive her. But it's really useful just to put that, because it's just starting to give that those real 3D shapes in there. And so we've got this sort of area down here, so let's get some more colours into here. Let me go for I wonder what an orange would look like, you see, just to add a kind of it may disappear in completely, but oh no, I think we can just see the orange kind of coming in there, so I can just pick out some orange detailing. If you've got gold pens, have I got gold pens? Let's see if I've got gold pens. Let's put some gold into that. That's a really good idea. But yeah, gold pens are really cool at this sort of thing. Just going to get mine going. Yeah, so let's see what the gold looks like. Yeah, I think a little bit of bling into that will be good. Sometimes it doesn't come out brilliantly on the camera, but it's working quite nicely in amongst that pink. Just to sort of bring some hints of gold into those sort of wiggles and lines. And they've got a nice sort of this sort of soft lilac-y bit here, so I might get some more of my these sort of like the ripples that we were getting up here. I think I might bring some into here, so I'm going to take them up behind that line again, sort of aiming at some of the layers you've got kind of coming all the way up, bringing that through kind of the top. Look, I'm just going to keep going up into that one, and then again sort of bring some of these sweeping lines following that ripple through. I'm quite thinking I might like to get a chunkier pen on this area here where it's sort of softer. If I've got one that's like a paler colour that's chunky, of course you might not have exactly the same pens as these, but I'm just going to see if I can reach around. So just give me all, forgive me, I'm just reaching over to my pen box. I've got my larger, slightly chunkier marker pen. This is quite good because it's got a double ended. It's got sort of a really thick end and a sort of pointy end. So I'm going to try just bringing, yes, some sort of that sort of thicker line through this sort of smoky section, and just following some of the shapes again. So we've got differences. Let's follow that pink line that I put in, and yeah, just get that ripple sort of smoke feel kind of coming through. And again, it's not, none of these are really complicated patterns. You could certainly add complicated patterns if you wanted to, but these are really quite simple patterns. But it's just bringing, just using these repeated lines and just finding the shapes in that shirt. I'm quite liking this pen, so I'm going to bring some more into that sort of lilac area. And a big box of pens is a great present to put on your Christmas list, you know, because you will always, now that you've got the bug for doing this, you'll always be able to use them. And so you don't have to spend a fortune, which is great about this, because you get some wonderful effects from the cheapest chips pens you get in supermarkets and in sort of big box stores and that kind of thing. Some of the best effects I've got have been from pens that cost, like, you know, a few pounds per pack, which is very satisfying to know. It's not so much like some of the more sort of academic art forms, you know, you have to buy really expensive paints to get the best results, and that's completely worth it if that's what you want. But the great thing about this as well is that you can buy absolutely the cheapest stuff in the shop and it will still give you wonderful effects. And sometimes it's like effects that you weren't expecting. Like if you get really cheap pens that are quite water soluble, you can actually paint them with a wet brush and they sort of start breaking up, the ink breaks down, and it creates loads of exciting effects, you know, which the manufacturers probably wouldn't like you to talk about, but, you know, are actually really, really interesting, and probably more interesting than if the pens were more stable. So always have a look and see what's on special offer, and you know, go through the kids and the grandkids pencil box and see what you can borrow off them, and just see what you can do with it. So I'm just using this sort of thicker pen, so it's quite a similar colour to the background, but it's just adding quite a sort of subtle effect, you know. It's sort of not being too strong, but it's keeping to that smoky quality, but it's just adding some sort of curls and things. And see, if you want to get into doing like slightly more controlled shapes here, I'm just putting in some curls and some curly cues, just sort of spirals kind of following into that, because I'm doing it sort of in quite close colour groups. It doesn't look too obvious and too contrived, just becomes sort of part of the background, just to get those sort of, I think the light's slightly taking it away, so you might not quite be getting that. But let's try some of them over in this corner where it's a bit more, the light's a bit better, I think, on the, you can just see, yes, I can start putting some of those kind of curls in and just following those sort of shapes down. Just sort of, I've got a nice area of pink there, so I'm going to work around that and leave that kind of showing through. And let's come in with some, let's have a look at this blue section here at the top, because we can get some more done on there. As I say, I don't know where it's going. We've got so many areas to explore. We've got about sort of 15 minutes to go, so I'm just going to keep going. So let's put in some pattern work into here. So let's get some curls going. Just some really simple, like curly spirals kind of coming in to these sort of areas, and see how that kind of changes. So we can bring those sort of the lines that we were doing and then turn them into curls and spirals, just so we've got something different happening in the background here. Take some lines through, let's bring them through, kind of imagine them sort of flowing through those tight corners and then out into a bigger space where you can kind of let it rip with a kind of spirally shape. And we can start bringing those in, so they're doing something different on this side. So again, we can put in some teardrop shapes and get those sort of curls, and they're all kind of sitting behind. So you want to do a big curl that goes behind a straight, you kind of just lift your pen off as it comes round, and those curl, that spiral is still carrying on behind that sort of upright in front, so it just sort of changes that feel. And bring all these sort of curls and lines through, just to create a different feel. So we can bring these extended lines out. We can bring some curls kind of coming. And I quite like this having a sort of slightly fancier background with still going to get our bubble factory or our pixie dust machine going on in the front. But let's just put some more elegant spirals in here. And then if you think about, if you want to continue adding some white highlights into those spirals, so you've got similar kind of feel to the bits we've got here, then just think about that sort of spiral, and then maybe just take a little curved line through their sort of areas, just a little like that, and as you come towards the middle of the spiral, you just make your little lines come smaller, and it gives it that slightly, you know, the way you get that sort of shimmer effect on a vinyl record, where you get that sort of like, you know, you get that sort of like almost like a fan of light just coming through. So you do like a larger one on the outside, and then smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller into the middle of the spiral. So in the middle of the spiral, you just got a kind of dot, and that helps to kind of give it that little hint of 3D quality. And then even on these ones, I've got sort of like teardrop shapes. You can put a dot at the end and then flick a little line down that teardrop shape. So it's just sort of getting a bit of highlight. And then same with here, just in the middle a dot, and then just come out, sort of swinging your pen out along the curves. So as the curve of the spiral gets bigger, you put a bigger highlight on each on each bigger spiral. And then through there again, just little highlights in the dark. Just sort of bring that through. Right, okay, so that's some, oh, bang the camera again. That's some more interesting kind of background. Let's continue the bubbles kind of coming up. So, because I've got some red bubbles on here, but then we're going up to this sort of joining up to this blue section up here. So let's bring some dark blue bubbles, nice strong dark, again circles coming down, giving that a different texture, and then that sort of spirally background is really beautifully showing up against that. And you can decide, are we going to go into the white sections? What are we going to do with those? I don't know. We'll work our way towards one and see what comes to us. So I'm going to bring that train of blue bubbles coming all the way down there, that one. And then the same with this one here. And just bring blue bubbles or circles or nodules coming down. Just to meet in those sort of pink ones around there. And again, we can put our highlights on to add a little flash of light so that they sort of blend in, or they connect visually to the pieces we've got going on down below. There we go, all the way down, just a little tiny dot. And then same on this, just coming down. There, so just sort of just brings those, and it just really makes those pop out and makes it all part of it. So there's a bit of white here. So what are we going to do when we get to white sections? We've got quite a lot of white sections over here. We can leave them just being pale backgrounds. I'm just going to see what happens if we draw around those. So we've got that strong blue line coming around that white shape. How does that look? I think that's quite interesting, just to even just if you just want to outline the kind of white areas so they become, you know, quite strong, quite sort of defined. And then I've got, yes, because then I've got this sort of other side of the blue here, so into that white section. So I'm trying to do this without masking it too much with my hand. So let me just come up and following that line down, quite awkward to do from this angle, so that's at least turn that into quite a sort of strong structure. Still not sure what's going to happen with this white space. May just chicken out from the white space at the moment and decide that I've got such a lot to do with all these pink backgrounds that maybe the white space is going to stay white for the moment. We'll see. Maybe a bit later, if I get a chance, I will come back to this one. So again, where I've got that pink column here, like I'm going to define that edge as well against the white background so that it's really nice and strong. I'm going to actually move my board fractionally that way. I think that'll bring it into better focus. There we go. So just got some lovely branching shapes here. So I'm just going to start off by following them and kind of wiggling my pen in and around them like that, just coming up. Just nice, strong, making that very pink colour stronger and more defined just by adding that pink line around the base, just working around the little white shapes. And for the moment, maybe that's enough. Maybe we'll leave the white spaces as being space to kind of see through, rather than worrying too much about them. If a fantastic idea occurs to you as to what you're going to do with your white spaces, please do share, and that would be great, because then we can all learn from it. So let's come round again. So bring some of the blue into this sort of area. I'm going to do a few more blue spirals, and I can just get them to come behind the purple lines in front and then just whiz round again. So I've got an area of much more sort of patterny base kind of coming up like that. And again, sort of spirals, and bring some petal shapes kind of coming up and around from there, and circles and spirals again, just filling in that back. I quite like having this very sort of abstract feel, and then sort of like getting glimpses of a pattern or something a bit more ordered lurking in the background. I think that's quite fun to have that contrast between the two, so we get sort of like very different feels happening. And then you sort of look initially and you think you've seen one thing, and then you look again and you think you can, and you notice something else, and that's, I think, really quite exciting. So there we go. Let's just bring some of these spirals up into here. Moving on through, and there we go. And then again, once I've got all of those in, I can think about where I want to add white highlights. So I've got some sort of like teardrop shapes here. So I'm going to do a dot in the kind of fat end of the teardrop, and then do a little flick line just coming off that, just to kind of, as if it really is catching on that shape like that. So again, like the dot in the top of the teardrop, and then a little flick just down like that, just to kind of give that. And here I've got a spiral, so I do a dot in the middle of the spiral, and then little half moon sort of bracket sort of shapes like that, just getting gradually bigger as the spiral gets bigger. So you kind of try and go with the shape that you've drawn, and then try and mimic the shape that's there that you've drawn with your white highlight. It will help to enhance that feeling of it being a 3D shape, or giving that little extra moment of light, which is really effective. And it's a little round, you can just put a little round dot in, but it's just thinking about how those sort of shapes work. And it's fantastic. I think there is like a sort of, as I say, it's fantastically busy. There's lots of things going on, and that's sort of, it's something you want to keep looking into and going, oh look, I can see a bit like that. So like, I think down here in this sort of pinky zone here, I think I'm going to put, I've got red bubbles here, so let's kind of go round the edge of those bubbles and just draw in some shapes in and around there. Just some more circular shapes, just being bubbles kind of coming in round in there, and then again into this section here. I'm going to take all this into circles as well, so that this is all part of this sort of bubble generation area. So let's bring some coming down here, smaller ones where I can, larger ones where I can fill up the space, this sort of size there, kind of one on top of the other, just moving down, and then larger shapes. There we go, just bringing them in, and into this area here, bigger ones can fit in with some small ones behind, or between, sorry. So where I've got those large shapes there, I can definitely make them with quite big circles, and then fill in with the small circles kind of around that. like that. And then here, if I think I'm going to add some blue in amongst the sort of those red lines as well, I can work back on top just to increase their kind of drama. And again, once I've got those in, then I can put in a row of highlights, and hopefully that's given you an idea of where we can take what we should now be calling the Fantastical Bubble Factory image, which is very much not what the phrase I thought I was going to be using when we started. But I think that just shows you. I think it's because we've used these strips to almost create like a grid structure over a background. It automatically gives you that feeling of foreground and background, and that sort of helps to create this kind of idea that we've got this structure on layers of structure, one on top of the other, even though they're very sort of abstract and pink and blue and not at all kind of really industrial looking. And yet they've got that feeling of busyness, of things sort of working on top. Oh, you know, it could be roads, could be I say pipes or parts of machinery or paths, or it could be stems and things in an environment. But I think it's a really interesting thing to play with, and I think, as you can see, just by adding these little white highlights, it really brings it to life. And I don't know what we've created, but I think it's something rather lovely and and rather beautiful. But that's where we're going to. Let me just draw back a little bit. As you can see, I've only just started in that middle bit, but even if you just concentrated on just getting this all done, you could leave the outside bits really quite sort of obscure. You could just take your bubbles sort of like going along out and disappearing off into space. You know, it's got this, and these start to look like sort of maybe even sort of steam being blown out of some sort of machine. And I think it's I think that's been a really great fun one to do. So there we go. That's our strange, ethereal bubble factory, which everyone needs in their lives.